well, that's the thing. It never really ended. Is kind of the
This is an aftermath.
Right. So you see 1977 is where all this like the whistleblowers and they start, MK Ultra becomes like a commonly known thing. And then it just so happens that the year after that, 1978, Ted Kaczynski comes out of nowhere because basically, they did all these experiments on young Ted Kaczynski, who was like this, super like Einstein level IQ giga brain guy. And his family says it's like, oh no, the experiments didn't really affect him that much or whatever, it wasn't that big of a deal. But basically after that, he was just like, you know what, fuck this, I'm out of society, I'm gonna go live in a cabin in the woods basically. And just he's like,
this was after he'd already become a professor too, and had a career as a mathematician.
Was it at Berkeley? I thought it was at.
It was at Berkeley. He went to Berkeley. He was a professor at Berkeley later as well as somewhere else. But he'd already had a academic career. Yeah,
and he was only a professor, or he was like I thought he was I don't know if he was a professor or if he was just a researcher.
He was a professor, I think he said.
Oh, okay. Well,
he had a doctorate. So.
Right. It was only for like kind of a brief amount of time. Like he wasn't there for a long time. He's like, I'm gonna get the fuck out of here, bro.
I feel it.
And so from all this time, from 1959 to 1978, he's kind of just minding his own business, writing his his philosophy on the world and his whole like anti-technology sentiment, which is like it's pretty interesting stuff, but obviously he did some nab.
He ruined it for everyone. He ruined living in the woods and writing manifestos for everybody else.
Yeah, so my suspicion with this situation is that he heard the Senate hearing about all this stuff going down and something snapped in him, and maybe it took a few months, maybe it took a year or whatever, but eventually his hate boiled to the surface for what had been done to him. That's my theory. No confirmation.
He started hearing about MK Ultra and then like something just popped off in his brain, and it's like in Kill Bill where it's like like the music starts going off and he's like, wait a fucking second. God. Dude. So basically from 1978 to 1995, Kaczynski mailed or hand-delivered a series of increasingly sophisticated bombs that cumulatively killed 3 people and injured 23 others. 16 bombs were attributed to Kaczynski. While the bombing devices varied widely through the years, many contained the initials FC, which Kaczynski later said stood for Freedom Club, inscribed on parts inside. He purposely left misleading clues in the devices and took extreme care in preparing them to avoid leaving fingerprints. Fingerprints found on some of the devices did not match those found on letters attributed to Kaczynski.
Interesting.
He was smart with it. Like
clearly
the fact that he got away with it for so long.
Yeah.
But basically his whole thing was he was like writing his manifesto during this, which was like against how technology's taken over society and all this kind of stuff. And but he would start sending letters in to government officials, and basically he's like, I'll stop bombing motherfuckers if you publish my whole manifesto, which they did. And then, so, I mean, but that's kind of like his like fucked up, like twisted logic, which it's like, it is fucked up, but it's like, it's probably true actually. Like if he just released a book, if he was just some no-name whatever professor guy or guy that lived in a cabin in the woods and never did nothing, and then he just released a book and he's like, the consequences of the industrial whatever, no one would have cared, no one would have read it. But now we all know who the Unabomber is, and then it's like, oh, he's got this whole manifesto, and it's like,
it didn't have to be that way. I think he really fucked up because now he discredited himself. Anybody who sympathizes with his views has been discredited for years and years and years. And even though what he has to say is very interesting and it's very foretelling, a lot of the stuff that he predicted has come to pass.
Absolutely.
But again, you don't, I think if he had stuck in society, he could have made something better. Instead, he decided to go be a fucking weirdo.
Right.
And
you can always choose to make a positive choice and a positive change instead of drawing into yourself and becoming a weird recluse that commits terror acts. So
it makes you wonder, like, if he didn't commit all of those terrible crimes with bombing people, it's like, and we somehow knew about just his ideology on the side, yeah, you just have a different look at it completely. You know,
I mean,
you could credit all of the positive things, but you know, to your point, it's like it's just tainted now because it's like, okay, well, so clearly your philosophy leads to you creating 16 bombs and killing people.
Well,
so.
and some of them, I mean,
Heath Ledger's Joker, by the way, is clearly inspired by him. Heath Ledger's Joker is clearly inspired by the Unabomber, the way he talks about everything. And
well, and you could even argue that it's like some of the bombs were going to like political people or like people in charge of like he would send it to like
it was professors and politicians.
politicians, like chairman of like lumber industry kind of execs and stuff like that. Computer store executives or computer store owners, like when computers were really popping off, he was just, you know, and it's like
interesting.
But and then eventually the biggest one that it didn't end up really going off. It was like US flight 544 or whatever, and there's a bomb like in the plane. And it didn't actually go off like all the way. It like filled the cabin with smoke or whatever, but they were able to land. Like the plane didn't get destroyed. But like if that bomb went off, he would have I forget how many people were on it. It was like dozens of people. It was you know, like 70, 80 people or whatever.
Yeah.
So he was ready to just, and I think it was just random passengers too.
Shit, dude.
Like it wasn't like specific targeted political, you know, person or anything like that. It was just definitely not the way to go about it.
No, I mean, especially if you're trying to drive home a specific point, like attacking random people, I don't think provides any sort of like, not that there's grounds for your argument when you're doing that kind of thing anyway, but like in your own mind, how do you justify anybody like taking what you say and you put forth into the world with any serious capacity when you're committing these acts?
But if you take an extremely intelligent person, do all sorts of crazy psychological manipulation to it, it's like that's literally how you get a supervillain origin story, which is basically what it is.
So and just to touch on this real quick again, I know we're talking a lot about the Clockwork Orange, but it's the same methodology to create some like sleeper cell, for example. You just attribute the emotion of rage to acts of ultraviolence instead of attributing the emotion of wanting to die. So instead of making an association that makes you withdraw from violence, it makes you hyper aggressive instead. So I mean, that's the kind of thing where it's like you never know. You'll just hear a song play one of these days, and you're just
No, for real. I mean, that's kind of like the scary part of it, where it's like the government feared. It's like, oh my God, are they gonna have a Manchurian candidate? Are they gonna have like a sleeper cell person where you could just take an unassuming person, but then the second that they hear some kind of like, you know, it's like a hypnotist or whatever. It's like on the, you know, when you hear these words, you will start to act like a chicken. But instead of act like a chicken, it's like you're gonna schmom a schmelding. Like, you know, you can convince like if you can convince an unassuming person to do something like that, it's like the options are limitless for how you can control someone.
I think Clockwork Orange 2 is a good representation of how those sorts of people could be sourced too. People who are pre-existing criminals and who've already been run through
that's
the
what
system
Charlie
and
Manson, bro.
Yeah,
Charlie Manson was already, you know, a degenerate piece of shit, already went to prison, and it's like, okay, it's like, well, hey, what do you got going on? It lets them keep their hands off of it too, because it's like, again, it's like this person was so bad, anything they do or any mistake they make can be attributed just to their vile nature already.
Well, and it was just a perfect way, because it was like such an intersection with the whole hippie movement and in the 60s, and they were kind of, you know, the hippies were very against the Vietnam War and against the sort of national interests and things, and they could say, you know, the more chaos that the hippies caused, the better it worked out for them. They're like, oh, perfect, we get to just blame everything on like this whole like free love movement and all this kind of stuff. It kind of like played into their hand.
Yep. And it's kind of interesting how many, you know, roots this has in a lot of the modern cultural films that are super popular here in the United States as well as abroad. But we had a couple of things listed, I think, as well that we wanted to sort of touch on real quick before we
briefly.
really
yeah,
wrap up here.
Firestarter.
Yeah, cultural references you might want to catch up on if you want to get hip to sort of.
Firestarter is basically just Stranger Things. I mean, I guess Stranger Things already fucking,
they're a little
Stephen
different.
King, but
Stranger Things is the Duff Brothers.
no, I know, but I'm saying like Stranger Things just hella bit off this because it's the same idea. It's like, like a woman, subjects herself to experience, and now her kid has superhuman abilities.
Powers. Yeah, they are very similar in that crossover. In Firestarter, the woman gives birth to a child who ends up with pyrokinesis and some real anger problems. Stranger Things is based on the Montauk Project as well, which was
the Russian thing, right?
I think that was another U.S. government thing, but essentially they were doing similar psychological research, but in the interest of time travel and like remote viewing style stuff, from what I understand. But they're like proximally related to each other, so it's kind of,
yeah, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Everybody's favorite fucking shooter, bro.
Call of Duty,
Black
oh my
Ops,
God.
bro. Such a MK Ultra game, bro. Honestly, like it literally is all about all this stuff.
Yeah, let me read you the synopsis real quick. So the game Black Ops is set between 1961 and 68 during the Cold War and Vietnam War, and it follows CIA operations carried out secretly. The player controls CIA op Alex Mason, aided by fellow operatives, as they confront a nerve agent called Nova 6 and sleeper agents within the United States. The story involves various global locations and historical figures, such as Fidel Castro, John F. Kennedy. Mason discovers he was brainwashed as a Soviet sleeper agent, and he ultimately confronts his targets and escapes with Hudson, implying his involvement in President Kennedy's assassination.
That's so
Such
funny.
a banger, though, by the way. Such a classic, bro, because Nova 6 is supposed to be Agent Orange.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, but of course, the whole sleeper cell part of the story is like, oh, of course, it's a Soviet sleeper cell. It's like, we're not doing that.
Yeah,
it was the Russians.
right.
It's always what it is with Call of Duty and all this stuff. It's like, it's like just, whatever. I mean, hey, the U.S., Russia, China, etc., they've all done some insane things. I mean, if any of these governments had a way to do this kind of stuff, they would, and I'm sure they probably have.
Of course.